So the camera is ready? Okay. So this is my last lecture. So today I will explain some results related to what I did yesterday when I spoke about the log determinant functional. So before starting with this, maybe some questions about what we did yesterday? No? Okay. So, so yesterday we spoke about the log determinant functional. Remember that, okay, I did it first for the Laplace operator on surfaces, and then I explained you that when you take a higher order, higher dimensional manifold, and you consider an operator of even order, 2L, you can define this functional in this setting. So remember that I denote it by AG differential operator depending on the matrix. So here I have manifold, Riemannian manifold MG. So this is a differential operator depending, of course, on the metric. I assume that it is conformally covariant, self-adjoint, of course. And, okay, the order is even equal to 2L. L is an integer number. And, okay, and I defined this P of AG, which is the determinant of this operator. I don't recall the definition. I will not really use it today. So there is a theorem due to Branson and Ørsted. And this theorem is exactly an analog of the formula I gave you yesterday for the log determinant functional for the Laplace operator on surfaces. Remember the Polyakov formula that gives you the relation between the determinant of the Laplace operator for a conformal metric. This was the Polyakov formula. And this formula, given by Branson and Ørsted, is an analog for higher order operators. Okay, so here I assume that my operator is of order 4, sorry. Fourth order operator. L is equal to 2. And, okay, so my operator is just like that. And then you have this very nice formula. So this is my functional, related, of course, to the operator A, which is minus 2 times the logarithm of P for the metric GW. W is the conformal factor here. GW is e to the 2W G over the determinant for the initial metric. And the formula tells you that there is a decomposition of this on a kind of basis, on a kind of basis of functionals. And it's given like that. And the important point is that these three functionals, 1, 2, or 3, are universal. They don't depend on the operator A. And they are explicit. I will give you the formula right now. 1 of W is 4 times the integral of W Weil square minus the integral of Weil square times the log of the normalized integral of e to the 4W. So it does not depend on on A, on the operator A. The second functional in the formula is related to the Panitz operator I introduced yesterday, plus 4 times the Q curvature times W minus integral of Q times the log of the normalized e to the 4W. And the last one, 3 of W, is equal to, there is a constant here which is 1/3, integral of the scalar curvature for the new metric, GW, integrated with respect to GW, there is a square here, minus the integral of the scalar curvature, this time with respect to the metric G. So this formula tells you that when you change your operator, gamma 1, gamma 2, gamma 3 will change, but not 1, 2, and 3. Okay? The functionals 1, 2, and 3 are universal. Okay. So this is a very important formula for what I will explain later. So let me, maybe I should, no, I write it here, but I will need it later. There is a theorem due to Alice Chang and Paul Yang. This theorem is concerned with the study of this kind of functional, this functional here, this kind of functional. And, okay, you will see later that just as I explained to you yesterday concerning the work of Osgood, Phillips, and Sarnak, when I explained you that when you look to the critical points of the log determinant functional surfaces, what you get is a constant Gauss curvature metric. When you try to do this here, when you look to critical points for this functional here, you will not get a metric with the constant curvature. But you will get something interesting, and I show you how you can use critical metrics for this functional to prove some rigidity result. So I will need this theorem, and this theorem tells you that in some situation, you can find a critical point for this function. And this is the theorem by Alice Chang and Paul Yang. And the statement is the following. You have to assume that gamma 2 is negative, and you have to assume also that gamma 3 is negative. And you consider a quantity that I denote by KD tilde, which is conformally covariant. You will see why when I will write it on the blackboard. Integral of bi square. This is a conformally covariant quantity. Minus, minus gamma 2 times the integral of the cube curvature, which is also a conformally invariant quantity. I explained yesterday why. So this is a conformally invariant quantity, this KD tilde. It does depend only on the conformal class of the metric G. And I assume also, so this is the definition of KD tilde, and I assume that KD tilde is strictly less than minus 1 pi square gamma 2. Then you can find a critical point for this functional Fa. Then there exists GW metric which is conformal to G, such that F of W is equal to the infimum of Fa W over all sorry, there is phi to phi here. All function in W22. Okay, and of course W is smooth. You can find a minimum for this functional. And moreover, and this will be very useful. This metric GW satisfies an equation. Not really the metric, but the scalar curvature satisfies an equation. This equation looks a little bit complicated, but it's not that complicated. You will see after. So the equation satisfied by the metric is the following: gamma 1 Weyl square plus gamma 2 times the cube curvature for GW plus the Laplacian of the scalar curvature for the metric GW is equal to minus KD tilde over the volume of your manifold. Okay. So let me, just to be honest, the existence of such a critical point is due to chain on Young. If you just prove that there exists a W22 minimum for this functional, the regularity is not due to Chang and Young. The regularity is due to Uhlenbeck and Vyachelovsky. Okay, so I add their name here. This is for regularity. And proving the regularity of the solution of the minimum here is not easy. Okay, so I will need this theorem after. So now let me spend some time on okay. Okay, well, I should give a title to this part. Call it self-duality and cube curvature. So I'm going to recall some very basic facts about the geometry of four manifolds. So here in this part, I will focus on four manifolds. And from now on to the end of my talk, the manifold will be four-dimensional. Okay. So I'm going to recall some basic facts about four manifolds, and this basic material is contained in the book of Bess, for example, Einstein manifold. Everything here is very basic. And okay. So what I'm interested in is the following functional. So I have my four manifolds, and I consider this functional, which is called usually the Weyl functional. Okay, so this is a functional which is constant on every conformal class, because this quantity here is pointwise conformally covariant. So this functional is constant on every conformal class. And what we want to do now is to study critical points of this functional in some special setting. Let me just make some advertising. Today I will do it just using some kind of variational method. And there are other ways to study this functional and to give some rigidity results using this functional. for example, using geometric flows, and this is what Vincent Bourg will explain on next week in his talk. So there is another ways to study this kind of functional. Today I will do it in a variational way, and Vincent will explain how you can manage the study of this functional using a geometric flow. So let me recall the Gauss-Bonnet formula that I already used here. So in 4D, it is written in this way: 8 pi squared times the Euler-Poincaré characteristic is equal to 2 times the Q curvature plus what? Plus y squared that you, if you use the formula for the Q curvature, you can write it integral of y squared. This is this quantity here, minus 1/2 times the traceless Ricci. So this is the traceless Ricci. Ricci minus 1/4 times the scalar curvature times the metric, plus 1/24 times the square of the scalar curvature. Okay. So now if you assume that M is oriented, so you know this is very, very classical, and this is very well explained in the book of Bess. The Hodge operator induces a decomposition of lambda 2 of M into 2 pieces, plus, I put the plus here. So the one with the plus eigenvalue and minus eigenvalues. And this, in turn, implies that there is, if you look to Weil, not as a 4-0 tensor, but as an endomorphism on lambda 2 of M, this decomposition here induces a decomposition on the Weil tensor. Remember that if you do this, the Weil tensor will be a traceless endomorphism, and you have this decomposition in 2 pieces. This is called the self-dual part, and this is called the anti-self-dual part. Okay, so what do I need now? I need to recall what is called the Hirzebruch formula, because I will need it later. The Hirzebruch formula tells you that the signature of your manifold is given in terms of the Weil tensor, and the formula is this one. Okay, so this is the signature of which is, as you know, this is a topological invariant, just as the Euler-Poincaré characteristic. So everything is here. What I should say, okay, since I want to study this functional here, and since this is a topological invariant, the study of this functional reduces to the study of this functional here. Okay? And if you play a little bit with with the Gauss-Bonnet formula on the Hirzebruch formula. Just you plug this into this, and you play a little bit. And what you get, and my notation will be that I denote by W plus of G the self-dual part, the self-dual functional. Okay? So if you play a little bit with these two formulas, what you get is that W plus of G is bigger than 2 pi squared times 2 times the Euler-Poincare characteristic plus 3 times the signature minus, so term involving the scalar curvature remains here. That's it. Okay. So before going on with this, I have to change a little bit the statement of the result of Cheng and Yang because of this decomposition, and to give me some more freedom in the use of this theorem. You see here that Weil is decomposed into the self-dual and the anti-self-dual part. So I'm going to change a little bit the statement of this theorem. And instead of putting only this term here, I have to change first here. So I introduce the plus and the minus functional here with plus and minus coefficients. So with the plus, it comes with the plus here. And, I put the plus in red and the minus in blue. And the minus when you put minus Weil here. Okay? And I also change here, in my definition of my invariant, I had this, I had it here also. And there is, for this new functional, where I separate the positive part and the negative part, and to each of it I put a different coefficient. For the positive part, the coefficient will be gamma 1 plus, and for the negative part, it will be gamma 1 minus. And I change, of course, my invariant will change. My invariant related to this minimization problem will change. And what I get is the fact that this metric here so be careful. When I write this, this means gamma 1 plus I plus of W plus gamma 1 minus I minus of W. Okay? I had the two pieces, but with a different coefficient here. It's not the same. It's not gamma 1, I separate. To give me more freedom in the use of this theorem of Cheng and Yang. Okay. So now, I think we can give the statement of I want to prove. So this is a theorem which is due to Matt Gursky. And the theorem is the following. You assume that your manifold is oriented. First, you assume that the Yamabe invariant of G0 is positive. Okay? And you assume that the invariant that I denoted by KP, the one associated to the Panitz operator I introduced yesterday, you assume that this invariant is also positive. Then the first Betti number is positive, if you prefer. H1 of M is not 0. Secondly, you still assume that the Yamabe invariant is positive. And you assume now that your invariant here, your conformal invariant, is 0. Then H1 of M is not 0 if and only if your manifold is conformally diffeomorphic to a quotient of S3 cross R. Sorry, yes, with of course the product metric here should put the metric, of course. I'm going to prove to give the complete proof of this theorem, and before starting the proof of the theorem, I give a corollary of this theorem, and the corollary is where is it? It's here. I have a problem in the numeration of my my papers. So okay, it is here. So assume that your manifold is locally conformally flat. Remember that this means that the Val tensor is 0. And you assume that the Yamabe invariant is positive. And you assume that the Euler-Poincaré characteristic is also 0. So your manifold is locally conformally flat, positive Yamabe invariant, on 0 Euler-Poincaré characteristic. Then your manifold is conformally diffeomorphic to quotient of S3 cross R. Okay. So now I think I can start the proof of the theorem of Gursky. It's not very clear in the statement, of course, that we are going to use all this machinery here. And you will see that the proof is based on this theorem here. The way we prove it is under this assumption, find a good metric in the conformal class. A good metric means a metric having a very interesting property. And this very interesting property will be this equation. And we play a little bit with this equation, and we are going to prove this. Okay, so so I keep the statement of the theorem because I need it. I don't need this anymore. So I can cancel it. Okay. So proof. There are several steps. So the first step is a very nice, let's call it a lemma, that proposition. A lemma which is due to to Gursky. Consider the conformal Laplace operator. I remind you that this is the Laplace operator. I recall you that my Laplace operator has non-negative eigenvalues. It's different from the notation used by Fernando. Plus, here we are in dimension 4, so it is 1/6, the scalar curvature. Assume that LG of the scalar curvature, you apply this conformal Laplace operator to the scalar curvature, and you assume that this is non-negative. Then, if the Yamabe invariant is positive, then the scalar curvature is positive. If the Yamabe invariant is 0, then the scalar curvature is 0. The proof is very, very simple. And it's very strange that the first one who noticed this fact is Gursky. And it's an essential tool in the proof of this theorem here. So the proof goes like that. So you consider the conformal Laplace operator and consider the first eigenvalue. So here we assume that the Yamabe invariant is non-negative, of course. Because what we want to study is when it's positive and when it's 0. So I will denote by mu1 this eigenvalue. So there is some function phi satisfying, of course, non-zero function satisfying this. So the first important thing to see is that the sign of mu1 is the sign of the Yamabe invariant. And the reason of this is based on what I called in my first lecture the scalar curvature equation. So the sign of this eigenvalue depends only on the conformal class. Okay, the second thing to say is that you can always assume that phi is positive because of the maximum principle. Since if the Yamabe invariant is 0, because of the solution of the Yamabe problem I gave you in my lectures, there is a metric in the conformal class having 0 scalar curvature, and this is just Laplace of phi equal to 0, because the sign depends only on the Yamabe invariant, equals 0. So phi is a constant, take just a positive function, and that's okay. And if the Yamabe invariant is positive, then, using the maximum principle, because this is positive, you can show that you can take phi to be positive. So now, consider this function f, which is basically the scalar curvature over this function phi. And then, you play a little bit, you compute, using, of course, this fact, the fact that phi is an eigenfunction, and what you find is that the Laplacian of f is given by this, plus 2 times gradient of f, gradient of r, of phi, sorry, over phi. So this is positive. This is non-negative. So this is bigger than minus u1 f plus 2 times this bracket here. So now I use the maximum principle. Using the maximum principle, you see that f cannot have a negative minimum. Okay? Because of the maximum principle. And now, if mu1 equal to 0, now if the Yamabe invariant is equal to 0, then using the maximum principle, you see that f, capital F, has to be 0. So the scalar curvature has to be 0. And if mu1 is positive, then f cannot have a 0 minimum, still because of the maximum principle. And this implies that the scalar curvature is positive. The proof is very easy. It's very nice, a very nice proof. Okay, so now maybe I can cancel this. Yes. So now the second step is a proposition still due to Gursky that tells you the following. Assume that the integral of y plus square is equal to 2 pi square, 2 times the Euler-Poincare characteristic, plus 3 times the signature. Then there exists a metric GW in the conformal class of G, such that the Laplacian of the scalar curvature with respect to GW, of course, and the scalar curvature with respect to GW is equal to minus 3 over 2 times retreat traceless square plus 1 over 8 times the square of the scalar curvature. And if the Yamabe invariant of my metric is positive, then the scalar curvature of GW is positive. Okay? So the proof is very easy. You apply this theorem here, basically. And with the right coefficients, so you choose gamma 1 to be 0, gamma 1 plus and gamma 1 minus. You choose gamma 2 to be equal to minus 12. You choose gamma 3 equal to minus 1. You compute. You use the Gauss-Bonnet formula. And what you have is that kd tilde is equal to 0. This kd tilde here. Okay. So now, since kd tilde is equal to 0, this is true. Remember that gamma 2 is minus 12. The 0 is strictly less than this. That's okay. So there is a metric in the conformal class satisfying that, this equation here. So kd tilde here is equal to 0. this is equal to 0 because of my choice of gamma 1 plus and gamma 1 minus. And when you compute it, you get exactly this equation here. So that's okay. Okay for the equation. Using this theorem here. And now you want to prove that the scalar curvature of RGW is positive. So you just have to compute Laplace of RGW. Sorry, excuse me. I'm sorry. There is a plus here and there is a minus here. I'm sorry. I'm confusing because in my notes I put a minus here. So now you compute the Laplace, the conformal Laplacian of RGW using this formula, and you see that this is non-negative. Okay, and since you assume here that the Yamabe invariant is positive, using the previous lemma of Gursky, this implies that the scalar curvature of GW is positive. Okay, so I will need another result of Gursky. So this is proposition 1, and I will need proposition 2, which is still due to Gursky. Now I assume that the integral of Weil plus square is positive, but is strictly less than this. Strictly less than 2 pi square times the same quantity. Then what? Then there exists a metric in the conformal class of G such that the Laplacian of the scalar curvature is equal to some minus epsilon square. I don't care about the value of this epsilon square, but it's positive. Just the only useful information. Sorry, there is a plus here. There is a plus here. Trace switching square, and there is a minus here. GW square. Okay, proof. And okay, the same holds. If the Yamabe invariant is positive, then RGW is positive. So the proof is exactly the same. But now you have to do something before. You assume that this is strictly less than this. So you choose epsilon 2 such that 1 plus epsilon 2 times Weil plus square is equal to 2 pi square times this. Okay? So you choose and you fix epsilon 2 in this way. And now you apply this theorem here. And the choice is this one. Gamma 1 minus is 0. Gamma 2 minus 12. Gamma 1 plus this time is equal to 12 times epsilon. And gamma 3 is still equal to minus 1. And what you see is, once again, that k d tilde is equal to 0. So you can apply this theorem. You have this equation, with 0 here, because your KD tilde is equal to 0. And you get exactly this, this equation. And how do you conclude that if the Yamabe invariant is positive, then the scalar curvature is positive? Exactly in this way. Okay, so now we can run into the proof of the theorem here. I should cancel something. Maybe this, because I don't need it anymore. Okay, so I assume, so this is the last step, step 3. So what I assume here in the theorem is that the Yamabe invariant is always assumed to be positive. So remember here this formula. It's still written, so it's very easy to remember it. You have that formula here, given by the Gauss-Bonnet formula. Okay, maybe it's better to see it here. Yes, it's better to see it here, using only W plus, and I write it in a different way, which is okay, plus 2 times the integral of the Q curvature, because my assumption is on the Q curvature, the integral of the Q curvature. So you have this. So this is an equality. Just playing with the Gauss-Bonnet formula and the Hirzebruch formula. So you have this. So if the integral of Q is positive, then what? Then sorry, something is wrong in my formula here. I'm sorry. No, it's okay. If I put it here, of course, it's a minus. Fine. Sorry, it's a minus here. So if the integral of the Q curvature is positive, then W plus of G is strictly less than 2 pi squared, 2 times the Euler-Poincare characteristic, plus 3 times the signature. So now, if W plus if W plus of G is equal to 0, because I want to use this proposition here, so I have to know that this is positive. So if it is 0, since the Yamabe invariant of G is assumed to be positive, so there is a result of Bourguignon. Telling you that beta 2 plus, the second Betti number associated to this part of the decomposition, induced by this part of the decomposition, is equal to 0. Then, okay, if you compute the Euler-Poincare characteristic using the Poincare duality, this is 2 minus 2 beta 1 plus beta 2 plus. Okay. And the signature, there is also a formula for the signature, which is the following: beta 2 plus minus beta 2 minus. And, okay, this is equal here. Using the result of Bourguignon, you know that beta 2 plus is equal to 0, so this is equal to beta 2 minus. So, this is assumed to be 0 here. So 0 is the value of this. I assume that this is 0 here. This is strictly less than 2 pi squared times 2 E of m plus 3 times sigma of m. And using this and this, if everything is correct in my computation, this is equal to 4 minus 4 beta 1 minus beta 2 minus. Sorry, there is a 2 pi square. We don't care. C is positive. So if let me see. So something is still missing. No, it's okay, because here my assumption in this part of the proof is that beta 1 is positive. Sorry, I have okay, so and assume, okay, in here I assume that beta 1 is positive. No, sorry. No, that it is 0. I'm something is no, sorry. I'm really sorry. This is exactly the contrary here. This should be 0. This should be 0 in the statement. This is the reason why something was wrong. Okay. So, it's I'm doing it by contradiction. I'm sorry. Just, I don't know why I wrote the contrary in my notes. Okay, so now it's correct. So I assume the contrary. I assume that beta 1 is not 0. So if beta 1 is not 0, this should be non-positive. Okay. So this is impossible. So it means that W plus of G has to be 0. Has to be positive. So since I assumed that the integral to Q curvature is positive because of this formula here, I have this strict inequality. So 0 is strictly less than W plus of G, which is, in turn, strictly less than 2 pi squared, 2 chi of m, plus 3 sigma of m. And I use proposition 2 here. So there exists a metric GW such that I have this equation here. Laplace of the scalar curvature is equal to epsilon 2 W plus square plus 3 over 2 times traceless Ricci square minus 1 over 8 scalar curvature square. Okay, and remember that epsilon 2 is positive. And remember also, since we assume here that the Yamabe invariant is positive, that the scalar curvature, by product of this proposition, the scalar curvature of the metric GW is positive. So, remember that I want to prove, now it's correct, I want to prove that the first Betti number is 0. So I take U in H1, which is harmonic. This is the definition of H1. And, okay, I introduce this quantity that I denote by capital G, which is the norm of U with respect to GW over the scalar curvature, which is known to be positive because of that, because of proposition 2. Now I compute a little bit on what I get. I compute the Laplacian with respect to GW. I don't write the metric here to go a little bit faster because Gérard and Lan want to go to the swimming pool, so they asked me to finish on time. So, so that's the reason why I don't write the subscript here, the metric, but it's with respect to GW. Okay, minus the gradient of G, gradient of the scalar curvature over the scalar curvature, and this is less or equal to minus G over R time. Okay, it's a bit complicated, but W plus square plus 3 over 2 time Ricci traceless minus square root of 3 over 6 R square. And there is a parenthesis here, plus another term, which is equal to G U to the minus 2 times the gradient of U square minus gradient of U square. Okay. So now, because of the Kato inequality here, because of the non-negativity of G, the positivity of the scalar curvature, and here you have something which is non-negative, this is non-positive. Okay, so using the maximum principle, the maximum principle tells you that G has to be constant. Okay? And we should say something more precise on this constant. So, if G is a constant, this is 0, but this is non-negative. And we know here that Weil plus is positive. Okay? So G has to be 0. And this is a contradiction. So beta 1 has to be 0. And this is the conclusion we want to reach. So this is the way the proof of the first part of the theorem goes. And now I focus on the second part. So I cancel here. So the second part it's a bit more complicated. Okay, so we still assume, of course, that the Yamabe invariant is positive. Now I assume that the integral of Q is equal to 0. So according to this formula here, so this is 0 now in my hypothesis. So W plus of G is equal to 2 pi squared times 2 times the Euler-Poincaré characteristic plus 3 times the signature. Okay, so I'm using this proposition written here. So there is a metric GW satisfying this equation here, equal to 3/2 trace lace Ricci square minus 1/8 square of the scalar curvature. And since we still assume that the Yamabe invariant is positive, we also know here that the scalar curvature is positive. Okay? So, we play the same game. So here, our assumption is that H1 is not 0. So I take U in H1M. U non-zero. Okay, just because it's very easy, I should have started with this. This sense here is easy. The fact that if your manifold, of course, is conformally diffeomorphic to a quotient of S3 cross R, H1 of M is not 0. Okay, so I'm going to prove this sense here. So I take my harmonic form U here, and I define G in the same way. And I know here that the scalar curvature is positive. And I compute exactly the same thing here. And this is less or equal to minus 3/2 times trace lace Ricci minus this times the scalar curvature square times G over R plus G U to the minus 2 times this the same quantity here, gradient U square. And I think that something is missing, parenthesis. Okay. So no, I'm more confusing. No, there is no parenthesis here. The parenthesis is here. Okay. So this is still non-positive. Okay. And using the maximum principle, you have that G is a constant. But be careful here. This constant could be 0 or could not be 0. We don't know. Actually, we don't know. What we want to prove is that we have the fact that the manifold It's basically a quotient of S3 cos R. So, sorry, excuse me. Okay, G is a constant. G is not 0. Cannot be 0, because my assumption is that there is something in H1. So G is not 0. It's never 0. Yes, of course. Yeah. No, it's a nice quotient of, yes. I don't give information. Just say that S3 cos S1. Just to be, yes, of course. Not every kind of quotient of this S3 cos. Yeah, you're right. Just forget this point. Just read S3 cross S1. Okay? So G is never 0. So look to that. So G is never 0. So G is a positive constant. R is positive. So this is not positive, but I'm looking to this part here. And since this here is positive and this is non-negative and this is 0, then this part here, parenthesis is missing here, this has to be 0. So this implies, it's not very difficult to see that this implies that the trace test Ricci can be written in this way. And forget that this is the trace of Ricci, of course. Minus 3 times something, with zeros here. Okay? Because this part here has to be 0. So, so since it has to be 0, just take the square of each part. You see that this is equal to 1 over 12 times the square of the scalar curvature. Okay? Take the square of this. This is 0, so you have this. So now I remember that I have this equation. It's written here. I don't have to write it again. I have this equation here, denoted by star. I plug this equation into this equation, and what I get, I hope the constant is the right one. I think so. If not, it's just a mistake I made in my computation. This should imply that Laplacian of Rg is equal to 0. Okay? So this should be right. Huh? So it means that the scalar curvature is constant because my manifold is compact. So it's almost finished. So so we know that the scalar curvature is a constant. We also know that G is constant. G is constant, so G is U over R. So we know now that R is constant. So the norm of U is constant. Okay? And, okay, it's not very difficult to see here that actually the gradient of u has to be 0. Because the norm of u is equal to 0, the gradient of u has to be 0. U is parallel. Now, if you use the Weizenbach formula, with u inside it, you will show that Ricci of u is equal to 0. Because you know that the gradient of u is equal to 0. So the term with the gradient of u in your Weizenbach formula will cancel. And you're left with that. So now it's over, because putting together this, the fact that the scalar curvature is positive, and the fact that you have a direction here that cancels the Ricci tensor, you have that what are my notations? Or I put lambda. That Ricci tensor looks like that, with positive lambda. And okay, positive lambda, because the trace, of course, is here, and we know that this is a positive constant because the Yamabe invariant is supposed to be positive. So now it's very easy, since you have that, to see that your manifold is quotient this guy there. Okay. So let me just conclude by the last thing, which is the proof of this corollary here. So, so my manifold is locally conformally flat, so while is 0. And the Euler-Poincare characteristic is equal to 0. So I have cancelled the Gauss-Bonnet formula, which was, okay, write it down quickly, 8 pi squared. This is 0. This is equal to integral of y squared. This is 0. Plus 2 times the integral of the Q curvature. So since this is 0 and this is 0, the integral of the Q curvature has to be 0. So we are in this situation here. In this situation here. So we know that the Yamabe invariant is positive. This is an assumption. And since your manifold is locally conformally flat, and the Euler-Poincare characteristic is equal to 0, because of that, this implies that the integral of the Q curvature is 0. So we conclude, we have this, if we are able to prove that H1 of M is not 0. So how can we do this? So, okay, just a technical point. If your manifold is not oriented, you take the double cover oriented, the double cover oriented one, and you can always assume that your manifold is oriented, so that you can use this here. So Weil is equal to 0, Yamabe is positive, and this is still the result of the same result actually of Bourguignon, telling you that beta 2 has to be 0. then what? You write the Euler-Poincare characteristic, which is equal to 2 minus 2 beta 1 plus beta 2. So this is 0. Beta 2 is equal to 0 because of that. So this is 2 minus 2 beta 1. That could be equal to 0. That should be equal to 0. So beta 1 is different from 0. Since we have this and this, we know that beta 1 is not 0. We have the conclusion here. Okay, so this is the end of the proof of this corollary here. And, okay, just to prepare the talk that Vincent will give next week, using some... You see, what we did here actually is finding a good metric, GW, which in some sense is an extremal metric for this functional W. And actually this metric GW in some sense is a critical point of this functional. And this is the reason why it's so useful to prove this kind of theorem. And there is another result which is due to Chen-Gus, Kiev, and Yang. Still using the idea of finding critical point for this functional W, the Weil functional, which is the following. And Vincent will speak much more about this theorem in his talk. You take a four manifold, and you assume that the Yamabe invariant is positive. And you assume that the integral of Weil square is strictly less than four pi squared times the Euler-Poincare characteristic. Then your manifold is diffeomorphic to S4 or RP4. On the way they prove this theorem is proving that actually when you have this pinching, you can go back using a very complicated machinery based on the fully nonlinear equations, Monge-Ampère type equation, let's say. It's not exactly Monge-Ampère type, but okay. Just to fix idea, to prove that when you have this integral pinching, and this is an integral. This is an integral because of the Gauss-Bonnet formula. This is the integral of Weil plus integral of the Q curvature. And what they prove is that you can pass, using fully nonlinear equation, from this integral pinching to a pointwise pinching. And once you have the pointwise pinching, and Vincent will explain that, you can use a result of Margerin that tells you that with this pointwise pinching, your manifold is diffeomorphic to S4 or RP4. And this result of Margerin is based on Ricci flow. It uses Ricci flow. So Vincent will explain that there is a way to obtain this kind of theorem using not using fully nonlinear equations, just using geometric flows. Not the Ricci flow, but another flow that he constructed to study this problem. And okay, this is still, the idea is still finding a critical metric for this kind of functional. Okay, so this is the end of my lectures. Thank you for your attention.